Today we are going to be viewing the perfect passive system. Four things that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at the perfect passive participle to start out with. That's kind of the base or the root for all of the perfect passive system. We're going to look at the perfect passive system as a whole, and we're going to look at the verbs that change in the passive voice. And hopefully I'll be able to give you a little bit of practice as well. So let's get started by looking at the perfect passive participle. First of all, what is it? Well, if I go into the back of my book and I look up the words amo or dokeo or duko or punio, they're going to give me four principal parts if I'm looking at a verb. Sometimes they give you three, but most of the time they're going to give you four. If they give you four, that last one, as long as it doesn't end in UR, US, we'll talk about that later. If it ends in just a US, then you're probably dealing with a perfect passive participle. This is the passive form of the perfect system. So just like over here, we have all of these present system, all of the present system comes from these two words. The perfect active comes from a maui. The perfect passive, all of the perfect passive stuff will come from a modus. And we call that a perfect passive participle. We look at dokeo, the perfect passive participle of it is doctus. For duco, it's ductus. For punio, it's punitus. Now, how does it act grammatically? How does the perfect passive participle act grammatically? Well, the first thing we have to understand is it acts like a first declension adjective. So just like we have a word like lautus, a participle like a modus will also act like an or a first declension adjective. So perfect participle modus is going to act just like lautus. If I have puer lautus, the happy boy, or if I have puer amatus, the love boy, they will agree in case, number, and gender, just like the other adjectives that we've had in the past too. If we look at this guy right here, amatus we have boy is nominative, it is the subject of that sentence. Puellam is the accusative direct object. Weeda is the verb. Amatam has the same case, number, and gender as puellam. So when I translate it, it's subject, verb, and direct object. I'm going to get subject is boy. I'm going to get verb, which is sees. I'm going to get direct object is girl. Just like an adjective goes right here, if it's a happy girl, sad girl, whatever, I'm just going to put loved. The boy sees the loved girl. Now, since it is passive, we're going to go to B right now. Since it is passive, it will not have a direct object. Loved won't. Obviously, sees, with it here, it can have a direct object because it's an active verb and not a passive verb. But our perfect passive participles are not going to have direct objects because they're passive. And remember, when I have passive voice, I'm going to have an agent or possibly an ablative of means here instead. Because it is passive voice, that's the same thing that's going to happen to words like amatum. It can have a prepositional phrase. It can have, like I said, ablative of agent. You can have ablative of means. Those prep phrases can go in those places. It can have an adverb. It can have an infinitive. Basically, it can have anything and everything that a verb has except for a nominative. Unless, of course, like we saw with puer, a modus, if the word that it modifies happens to be nominative, then yes, puer is the subject of the action of modus. But if puer were in the accusative, then the case has changed. In this case, they're accusative, and guess what? Puer is still the actor or the subject of the action in amatum. So it doesn't. This is by coincidence that it ends up being nominative. The word that it modifies will act as the subject. So in this case, puellam, if I want to create a participle clause here, The girl is the one who's being loved. If I want to treat it like an adjective like I did here, that's fine as well. But for later on, if you want to think of the word that it modifies, puellum, being the doer of the act, or being not the doer of the action, but being the subject of the action. Because remember, passive voice, the subject is not doing the action, it's actually receiving. So, let's move on to this guy right here. I'm going to show you what I mean by this. Here I have a nominative. It's going to end up being the subject of the sentence, so we'll put boy here. I have a prepositional phrase. I have an ablative of agent. I have a genitive modifying patre. And I have puellum is the accusative. And then I have amatum, which is modifying puellum. In this case, the passive amatum is going to grab a hold of all of these participle phrases, or prepositional phrases, excuse me. So I have the boy is the subject, the main verb is sees, the direct object is the girl, and now loved is modifying girl. By her father is going to go with loved as the ablative of agent, and then in the forum is also going to go with loved as a prepositional phrase. So the boy sees the girl, loved by her father. He sees her in the forum. You could have forum with weed it. You might have to use context there to decide whether or not the boy sees the girl in the forum or whether the boy sees the girl and she's being loved in the forum. You'd have to use context. Not that big of a difference. How do I translate this guy? Well, you've seen me so far. The literal translation, I'm just adding ed, or the simple past form of the verb. So love becomes loved. Teach becomes taught. Ductus, which is lead, becomes led. And then punish becomes punished. You can see that I'm adding either ed or just the simple past form of the English verb. That's one way to translate it. And we saw that simple translation way up here whenever I said that the boy loved. The boy sees the loved girl. That's the simple translation. That's a literal translation. That will never be wrong. However, we can, as we get more comfortable with these perfect passive participles, we can use the context of the sentence to determine how we're going to use the translation. In this sentence right here, puer in forum a patreos puellum doctum vidit. Doctum is the participle modifying puellum. In foro and a patre eos, we said, are going to go with, I'm going to make them go with doctum. Puer is the subject and vidit is the verb. So we have the boy sees. The literal translation is right here. The boy sees the girl. So we have subject, we have an accusative direct object, and we have a verb. The boy sees the girl. That's the basic part of our sentence. And just like an adjective, I'm going to attach doctum to girl. The boy sees the girl taught. And I'm going to place these two prepositional phrases, one of them ablative of agent a patre, I'm going to place those with doctum. So the boy sees the girl taught by her father in the forum. That's the literal translation. And that is never going to be wrong. But we can use context. And I don't want you to get too caught up in this. As you feel more comfortable with these participles, with the perfect passive participle, as you get more comfortable with them, you can use a personal, a temporal, or a causal relationship to translate that participle phrase. So that same sentence that we just had up here, the boy sees the girl taught by her father. If we want to make it a personal relationship, we're going to use words like who or that. So the boy sees the girl who was taught by her father in the forum. You have to make sure that you keep this passive. You don't want to make that active. So the boy sees the girl taught by her father. You have to make sure that it stays passive. Do not make it active. The boy sees the girl that was taught by her father. Kind kind of iffy there. Temporal relationship, that has to do with time. When did it happen? Before, after, during, any of those words that have to do with time, you can make a temporal relationship. So that same sentence, the boy sees the girl taught by her father in the form, can become the boy sees the girl when she was taught by her father, before she was taught by the father, or after she was taught by her father in the form. We use those. Causal relationships, words like since, because, you can use although. The boy sees the girl because or since she was taught by her father in the form. That's the reason that he sees the girl, so it becomes cause. Now, don't get too caught up in these yet. Just make sure that you understand this literal one. And just keep those others in mind as you feel more comfortable with them. You can translate them that way. All right, next we have the perfect passive system. Number one, we're talking about the forms. We're going to use that perfect passive participle that we've had for the last, I don't know, 10 minutes or whatever. We're going to use that perfect passive participle as the base, and then we're going to use a form of soon. It is very important that when I look at the perfect passive tense, that I use that form of soon, but think of this as one word. Think of it as one word. Amatasume is married. They are not two separate words. They are one. So for the perfect passive tense, I have amatasum, amatus est, and I put amatus here so that you wouldn't get confused, but understand that because these are all plural, we're going to use amati. If it's masculine, we'll use amatai. If it's plural, feminine, we'll use amata if the subject of the sentence is neuter. So I put those on there so that you can see where they came from. But make sure that you understand that that shows up as singular, but you're not going to have a singular there. You're going to have plurals right here, because if it's we and we're all masculine, we're going to have amati sumus. And if it's you all and they're all feminine, you would have amatai estis. And if it's neuter, you would have amata sunt. And that's because that's the plural nominative form. So remember that these perfect passive participles, when they're added to sumus, are going to have the same case number and gender as the word that is the subject. So they're always going to be nominative. They're either going to be singular or plural. Pluperfect, we're adding aram, aras, arat, aram, aras, arat, aramus, aratus, or arant to our perfect passive participle. Again, think of that as one word. I'll explain that in a second. That's the pluperfect passive. Future perfect passive. Amatus ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritus, and erint. Not erunt, but erint. Okay? Those are the forms that we're dealing with. So for the perfect, I'm adding sumes est, sumus estis sunt. For the pluperfect, I'm adding aram, aras, arat, aramus, aratus, arant. And for the future perfect, I'm adding ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritus, and erint. If I can think of these as one word, it'll make it a lot easier here in a second. And this is why. The pluperfect marker is ERA. The future perfect marker is ERI. The perfect marker is its own marker. It doesn't really have one. We have E, isti, and it for the perfect active. So if you remember that sumes est is the perfect, just like E, isti, it, sumes est, and imus, istis, erunt, sumus estis sunt, there is no tense marker being used here. There is no tense marker being used. It's just using sumes est. If I can remember that and think of it as one word, then this ERA now becomes a lot easier to translate, because I see ERA and I'm thinking pluperfect. And we know that ERA equals had. So in this case, I had been loved. And for the future perfect, it's the same thing. ERI is the future perfect tense marker. So I will have, because remember ERI equals will have. To make it passive, I'm out of form of be. So I will have been. I will have been loved. But the only way that's going to work out is if I think of those as one word. Number two is, how do I translate it? Well, in the perfect system, you're going to use the perfect system tense of be plus the ed, or the simple past form of the verb. You'll hear me say tense of be plus ed about 100 times when I'm dealing with the passive system. So let's look at a modest est. Here's where you guys are going to make a little bit of a mistake when we're translating this, especially if you're not thinking of this as one word. If I look at a modest est here, a lot of you guys will see the est and think of is. We have to think of this as one word. He is loved is wrong. We think of it as one word and we say, oh, okay, I have a perfect passive participle plus a form of be, but there's no tense marker. It must stay perfect. And we know that our perfect tense is going to be was loved. And then I see this one, I still have my perfect passive marker, but this time I have ERA. A lot of you guys are going to want to say was, but it's not was. ERA means had. He was loved is wrong. When I get to the future perfect, same thing. I get ERI here. ERI is will have, not will. It's will have been loved. He will be loved is wrong. These are present, imperfect, and future passive translations. They are not perfect system translations. So if I think of them as one word, it'll make it a lot easier. This is not going to be is. No longer is it is. It is a part of this word. This word is perfect. I've added est, so I've not changed the tense because this is perfect. I've not added a tense marker of any kind. It stays perfect, which means was loved. Cannot make it present tense. It's perfect system. Same thing here. ERA equals had. ERI equals will have. To make it passive, I'm going to have will have been, had been, and then add my ed form. You must think of these forms as one word. You have to. Because if you don't, you're going to put up here, he is loved because of this est, and it's wrong. So don't do that. Don't make that mistake. Fix it. Okay, next, verbs that change. I'll make this really quick. There are several verbs that change their form a little bit, or I'm sorry, their English form a little bit whenever they come to the passive voice. Here are two examples, facere and videre, that change their meaning and their grammatical structure in the passive voice. In the active voice, they follow that normal subject-verb direct object form. And we're going to see that right here. We have subject, we have verb, we have direct object, so we have subject, we have verb, and then we have our direct object. The boy makes a house, or builds a house. Okay, same thing here with weed it. We have subject, we have direct object, we have verb based on our cases, and then we have, again, subject is boy, verb is sees, direct object is the house. These two verbs, when you put them in the passive voice, change. In the passive voice, they follow the pattern of subject, linking verb, and complement. Now, you're going to ask me why. And I know that you're going to ask me why. That's why I have that big Y there with a question mark. And I have the incorrect form of there. How about we make that E-I-R. Their meaning changes. And there is a difference of opinion between the creators of English and those who created Latin. So that's why we end up with this linking verb complement pattern. The people that created Latin and developed Latin grammar felt like the word become, which is what facere becomes in the passive voice, and seem act like be verbs. Well, let's see if they do. In the passive voice, if I put, for example, the girl, facta est, becomes a woman. Notice that these are both nominative. And that is because you have a subject, puella, which is nominative. Then you have your linking verb, which is facta est. And then you're going to have your complement, which is muello, mulier, which is also nominative, linked together. So remember our subject linking verb complement was nominative, linking verb, nominative. And that's what I end up with here. The girl became a woman. Also, same thing with whenever I change video into the passive voice. I get a subject, I get a linking verb, and I get a complement. That's why both of these are nominative. The boy seemed sad. Subject, linking verb, complement. Now I'm going to finish up by giving you guys a little chance to practice some of this stuff. I'm going to give you some examples. I gave you 8 of them, 8 examples. What I want you to do is I want you to translate these literally as possible. And I want you to hit pause and go ahead and do that on your own right now. Okay, well, if you paused it and you've done these, well, hopefully you're gonna translate the same these the same way that I did. Isis comes from edo, which is to eat. So I have he. How do I know it's he? Because this is masculine and singular. I have had because of the ERA. I need a form of be, been, and then the passive form of eat is eaten. He had been eaten by somebody else. This is just the perfect passive participle by itself. So it's just ed form, completed. This time I have she because it is singular because of the T. Singular and nominative A is feminine, so I have she. The ERI tells me it will have been. And then skisa is cut. She will have been cut. The exuda is neuter plural. The NT makes it plural. Nominative A in the plural is neuter. So I'm going to say they, talking about neuter things, the neuter things. They, there is no tense marker. This is perfect. So it's going to be were. And then exuda means taken off, or to take off, so we're going to make it passive voice taken off. They were taken off. Vulneratum comes from vulnero. Ariaviatus, we get an atum here. That is going to be either accusative and masculine, or it could be nominative or accusative and neuter. Translated, it's just going to be wounded. Now we're going to get to the sentences. As I translate these sentences, I'm going to read from left to right. Forte, adverb, miles. Looks like it could be a nominative. No, it's nominative. Claudio is not sure yet. It's either ablative or dative. I look at the next word, vulneratus, which tells me what happens to the soldier. And I know that it's going to be an ablative of means with the passive voice. Okay, so this is a perfect passive participle. Perfect passive participle. It acts like an adjective. So it modifies the nominative singular masculine. That's why it's US. I get a prepositional phrase here, and then I get my main verb. And by the way, that comes from Cato. That is the third principal part of Cato. So I have, by chance, the soldier, because he's my subject. And he was, what? Wounded. That's the adjective. By a sword. I think I said it was cut. It's not its fault. He fell past, that's perfect tense. Fell. Where did he fall? Into the water. Number 7, I get a nominative singular. I get an ablative of some kind. I have a nominative singular already. I see that I and I think, oh, coach, that looks nominative plural. I'm going to look right here, right now, at the verb, main verb, motorai. That's singular. So that I is not nominative. What are the other forms of I? Genitive. Seri is an adjective, modifying pueri. Pueri is a genitive, modifying sanguine. In this case, I get moderat as my main verb. My subject is the girl. I need a passive voice verb. It is was moved, right? Was because of erat. Nope. ERA, coach, means had. Because this is one word, in ERA, the marker is pluperfect. The girl had been moved. By, ablative, means by the blood of the poor boy. You heard me say before that to translate these, I'm going to use a tense of be plus ed. Here's my tense of be. There's my ed. Had been plus my ed. That's how I'm translating this. Okay, next one I get puer, which is nominative singular. So is Tamarius, modifying it. And piscinum is an prepositional phrase. Iactus, ooh, perfect passive participle, coach. It acts like an adjective. So it's going to modify puer, which is nominative and singular as well. Move this up a little bit. I get ab patre. I get a genitive, especially if you know your ECA id chart by now. That's genitive modifying patre. So I'm going to scoot my prepositional phrase over here, and then I get a main verb. So it's passive voice verb. So I have subject, I have passive voice, and I have agent or means. I can look up here right now and say that I'm going to have an agent, not means. So my subject is the boy. My verb is was. Coach, this is perfect. There is no tense marker being used, so it's going to stay perfect. I'm not going to put is here because you told me to think of those as one word. So it's going to be was caught or captured. Then I need an agent. Here it is. By the father. By his father, because of the genitive. That is the basic form of the sentence. So I've dealt with, here, let me erase some of this real quick. So it's not confusing. I've dealt with capta erat, so it's gone. I've dealt with puer, it's gone. Tamaris is reckless, so I'm going to say reckless right here, because that's the adjective modifying boy, so it's gone. Into the pond, into the fish pond was thrown. Now, this is an adjective too, and it modifies boy. The reckless boy thrown into the fish pond. Was captured by his father. And that's it. I'm finished. So hopefully this helps you guys out, and you're able to do a little bit better with these passive voice words. So good luck tomorrow.